And thank you so much for a really nice introduction. Just a heads up for everyone here is very much technological and a lot of engineers in the room. Don't be scared off by the title. I may not have any algorithms on my slides or no pictures of gears and machines, but upside is that I also don't have legal text on the slides. There's just one slide with legal text. So I would like to start with introducing responsible AI at Equinor. Equinor is a global energy company with over 22,000 employees. And in responsible AI, my group, we have around 18 people dedicated to this with 10 different disciplines going on from data science, occupational health, procurement specialists, GDPR experts, a lot of different lawyers, cybersecurity, human factors and control, safety, security, and sustainability. So with that, I would like to start off by talking a little bit about this new landscape for AI and what is it that's been changing in the last few years. So some of you who maybe aren't constantly on LinkedIn like I am, you may have not noticed that for the last couple of years, a lot of organizations have been implementing responsible AI projects, groups, initiatives. They call it differently. And there's a really good reason for that, because we remember all when ChatGPT came into place around November 2022, a lot of the companies wanted to kind of like ride that wave and implement AI as quickly as possible. But then responsible AI came into place, and although ethics of AI has been long discussed, maybe as old as AI itself is, it hasn't been really materialized as such in organizations. And now materializing it, we have a good reason for that, is because for years now, we have already been experiencing irresponsible AI. And we are talking a lot of new security risks that AI comes with it, a lot of uncertainty and risk mitigation and difficulty to kind of like implement the same risk management strategies as for traditional software development. We've seen a lot of bias and fairness issue, how many people have already been harmed due to biased outcomes of AI. Immense environmental impact is also a very much growing topic. People are afraid of their changes in the workplace. Are they going to be replaced, and what's going to happen? And then finally, AI race. It really seems like every organization out there is racing to implement AI, no matter what is this cool new shiny technology that we must use. But sometimes we don't really think safety first. And luckily around the world, there have been a lot of initiatives to address certain things. There are different AI incident databases. There are repositories that are listing all sorts of different AI risks and categorizing them based on where they come from and what do they impact. And there's even CO2 impact measurement tools that would measure the CO2 impact of your machine learning systems. And if you were to Google responsible AI for different organizations, it may seem different things. You can see the big tech giants like Google and Microsoft listing all sorts of different responsible AI principles that they seem valuable and they measure their AI systems by. And for us, we are also identifying our responsible AI principles with the human in the center, with human oversight being in the middle of everything. And then talking about safety and security, not only are AI systems safe and secure, but also how we can use them to enhance safety and security, the robustness and resilience of the systems to increase their reliability, the impact on the environment and sustainability. And not just that, but also asking the questions, do we really need AI for this given problem? Because sometimes it seems like AI is just a solution running around looking for a problem. And sometimes it's not really the right solution at all. We don't always need to take an airplane if we can literally ride a bike sometimes. And these are the things to measure as well. Then we have fairness and openness that both talk about biases and discrimination and societal issues like that, but also explainability and traceability and contestability of AI system. And then through openness, we're talking about discussing openly and transparently on what organizations are doing while they're implementing AI. And this is all reflected in governance and accountability, taking responsibility for what we are doing with AI, having written procedures and processes on how we are dealing with it, and just taking the responsibility. But in the past year or so, there has been another factor that has contributed to this kind of like wave of responsible AI initiatives, and that is the law and the regulations. And if the regulations aren't followed, there will be really high punishments. So now we see a lot of companies kind of racing to implement the ethical perspectives of AI and the safety of AI to meet the regulations. So I'm just gonna, for the next few slides, focus a little bit on that and to see what is it to expect and how do we navigate this new landscape and how do we look at what is it that it's our legal obligations, but also if it's not a legal obligation, what is our obligation as responsible member of the society? Around the world, there haven't been as many regulations as such as we are expecting in the EU, or it has already happened in the EU, but there are many initiatives going on safe AI. So some countries have policies, we have laws, we have regulations, and there are also safety AI institutes that different countries are forming. And already this picture from April 2024 here is outdated because there is something new happening in this scene almost every week. And you can imagine the way AI is shaping, forming differently, and the people are finding new ways to use it and misuse it and abuse it. The regulations need to follow that as well. So the EU is at the forefront of this, as typical with these kinds of regulations. And already, well, a month ago, the EU AI Act has come into force. And some may argue, and it's actually true, that, well, the AI has already been regulated and the AI is already regulated. And there are so many laws and regulations that are already applicable to AI. But what the EU AI Act is bringing on top of this as a complementary regulation is looking at the harm that AI can do to people, society, and the environment. And it goes alongside of the industry-specific regulations. So this is that one legal text slide that I prepared you for. It is a definition of what an AI system actually is. And I'll just read it, that AI system means a machine-based system that is designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy and that may exhibit adaptiveness after deployment, and that, for explicit or implicit objectives, infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as prediction, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. And a couple of weeks ago, I talked to a standards specialist who is working on harmonized standards that are going to come up hopefully in a year to follow the EU AI Act. And I said, well, there's been a lot of discussion about this definition here. It's neutral, it's broad. Some people think it's only generative AI. Some people think it's only everything, any programmable device, basically. And he said, read it again and read it again and read it again, and you will see that you can simplify it. But that may be a good advice, but we are still facing a challenge that there may be many systems out there that fall under this definition, and we may not think intuitively that is AI. So we need to kind of like take a step back and see what it means for our organization. And it's something that we are still trying to kind of describe. And this definition has actually changed in winter. This winter here, and there has been a much broader definition in the previous text, legal text of the EU AI Act, but this one has been taken from the OECD. And if you search for the AI definition by OECD explanation on Google, you will find a lot of explanations, and there's a lot of visual like illustrations that will help describe this definition. So I encourage you to do that. But going back to the EU AI Act, it can actually be just summarized, and often is summarized through this risk pyramid. And so let's start from the bottom. At the bottom, we have the low-risk AI systems, and they don't have any mandatory legal obligations. These are the systems that can't pose serious harm to people, society, and the environment, for example, spam filters on email. Next up, there are limited risk AI systems. And for these, there will be some legal obligations, particularly on the providers of these systems. They will have to follow some transparency obligations. And it makes sense when you see that these are the systems that are, for example, AI chatbots, or some systems that will generate content like text or images or videos with AI. So these transparency obligations are that the providers need to tell us what copyrighted data has been used to train these systems, how these systems were developed, what is the scope and limitation of their use, and also they need to be transparent that we are interacting with an AI system. So there's a lot of work being right now done, both in the EU AI office that has been appointed in June this summer to help to help this compliance process. But also I know that Meta and MIT have a lot of labs working on how we are supposed to watermark certain AI generated content, which may be easier for images and videos, but rather difficult for text. So there's a lot of ongoing research in this area. The third one on this scale is the high-risk AI systems, and these are the really serious ones, and they will have really heavy legal obligations. There are two different groups of these systems. So here, before this line on your left side, there is a one group that is taken from machinery directive, and these are, for example, safety components for machinery, safety protective equipment in potentially explosive environments, any sort of medical devices. So you can see it's product safety in this category. And these systems automatically fall into high-risk AI system category, whereas the other ones, such as management and operation of critical infrastructure or employee and worker management systems, are not automatically high-risk AI systems unless they pose significant risk. And there are several actually exceptions for these systems that you can explore and check, and it's the intended use of these systems that will actually determine at the end where do they fall in and what are the legal obligations. So what was actually the criteria for these high-risk systems? Well, firstly, it was the intended purpose of an AI system. I would oftentimes get approached and someone asked me, well, I have this generative AI solution or something with large language models, and I want to summarize this and that. Are large language models high risk? Well, it was actually not the technology at the core of what is high risk or not. It's actually the intended purpose. It's the use case at the end that is scrutinized, not really the technology itself. So maybe the LLMs would fall into limited risk, but if you're using it to plan offshore operations, for example, we are an energy company. So if our workers are using it to plan offshore operations, then there is a chance it may fall under the high risk because that is the intended purpose behind it. Then next up is the potential extent of the harm. And remember, we are talking about health, safety, and environment type of harm, the extent to which harmed persons are in a vulnerable position, and the extent to which this outcome of the system can be reversed. And then finally, a thing that I've mentioned a few slides ago is the extent to which existing legislation already provides effective measures to address and minimize these risks. So it's not the AI Act alone. There is an ecosystem of legislations that are connected to it. So what are these kind of requirements for high-risk AI systems? Well, there are 7 major requirements that developers and data scientists need to be aware of. Is that the system should implement an iterative risk management system. They should have a specific data and data governance, provide technical documentation, and there's a really extensive list of questions that can be answered to provide this technical documentation. And I advise you, if you're interested into it, there are many EU AI Act explorers and navigators that you can Google and check, and there are kind of official websites that can help you understand these closer. Fourth requirement is to keep logs or records so you can trace back if an error occurs. Transparency and instructions for users. This both means who is accountable, to provide the list of people who are accountable, who can be contacted if something happens, but also to have clear instructions for users so that the users know how this high-risk system should be used. And then there would be additional requirements for the user on how to use this legally. Then we have human oversight to make sure that human can always take over the control of the system, in some cases pause it or even stop it. And then finally, to describe the measures for accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity, and implement a certain feedback loop for improvement. And then finally, we have the last category, which is the unacceptable risk AI systems. And these are the systems that are already going to be banned in EU next year. And they are systems that can perform some social scoring or subliminal manipulation or collection of databases with people's faces, especially the ones without the consent. And the non-compliance fee is rather high. It's up to 35 million euros or 7% of companies' annual turnover. And this year is typically why companies are racing and chasing to implement responsible AI. But responsible AI, I don't think it's something that we are afraid of punishment, but it's a social obligation to do it. So I don't think the regulations should be the primary reason for it. But let's see, how do we start preparing for compliance? There are three basic steps. So first one is to implement, I'm sorry, that was wrong button. Okay, so the first one is to implement a sort of AI register. And what an AI register is to have an overview of the AI systems or AI products, features that you have and that you have obligation for. And this is not only good for the potential AI audits that you may face, but it's also going to be an obligation in case you have a high-risk AI system. It will need to be registered in EU's own high-risk AI systems database. Next up, once you know what you have, you of course need to know which risk category does it belong to. So AI risk management. And a recommendation on how to do a first step of this is to actually perform a collection of risks. So a collection of risks is just a list of identified risks with the solutions or systems that you have in place. So what we have been doing is to talk to each team and all the product owners of different AI systems and talk to them, what are the risks that you have identified? And with that kind of list, we would be able to not only help the future products be like, hey, you have kind of similar features. These are the risks that this other group has identified. They seem to have some sort of similarities. Have you thought of this? To help people think in the terms of risk, because not everyone has been trained to think in these terms. And it also assists auditors, it assists the procurement team and product stakeholders to have an overview. And then for responsible AI, it assists us to have this sort of heat map and focus map, area map. Where are the risks? What kind of features, what kind of use cases are associated with higher risks? When we're talking about risks and what can go wrong, it's also amazing thing to have in place is an incident reporting system, and in this case, an AI-specific incident reporting system. So incidents would be any outcomes of the system that can cause harm or that have already happened and cause harm. And if I were to kind of oversimplify the situation, we can see three main categories: attacks, intentional abuse, and failures. In attacks, we are talking about all sort of cybersecurity incidents that can happen or harms. For intentional abuse, you may have a healthy purposed AI system, but it can be misused or abused intentionally or not intentionally, actually. And we will talk about the non-intentional a little bit later. And then finally, we have failures. And this is something that us data scientists or developers need to account for. It is things that we need to think about. And we've already heard of concept shift earlier today, but this involves data drift, discriminations, to what level your system is opaque, and so on. So I'm going to go on to an example of these kind of failures. For example, AI model decay and their ripple effects, or the model degradation. And what this means is that it's a degradation of model performance over time, or change of a model over time, that can happen gradually or suddenly. And these are most typical things that the data scientists or developers don't account for, and then they cause unintentional failure. So for example, environmental changes, or sociopolitical changes. There's a famous example from COVID-19 with Zillow. Zillow is a company that buys and rents properties. So they have a very famous algorithm, Zestimate, that was telling them which properties to buy and how to sell it. And their algorithm didn't really account for some drastic changes, such as the pandemic. And they have lost millions and millions and millions. They've been like near bankruptcy because of this effect. So this is something to keep in mind. Next up, it's model staleness, usage drift, data drift, and concept drift. Why I'm just going over them, because I will have separate slides for them. Except usage drift, it is when the end users start slowly using the systems for different purposes than what was intended first. So for example, we implement Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, or a version of the different version of ChatGPT, how people see it. And then it's implemented to summarize PDFs or something like that. And then slowly users see different use cases of it and start using it in ways that aren't recorded or approved, and no one has kind of foreseen. And then all of a sudden, some harms can happen from that. So going to the model staleness, this is when we have some aging algorithms and outdated assumptions. So we are using data to train our models, and that data actually doesn't represent our current reality. And famous examples of these are historical biases in AI systems that cause a lot of discrimination, and that has already happened, and innocent people have ended up in jails in the US because of this kind of reason. And here you have an interesting example. On the left side, you see that for those of you in the back who may not see it, you can use the data, training data from 2015 to 2020. And then the result was that 3 women here, a higher number of women were rejected due to historical bias, whereas when the data interval was shortened to be used from just a couple of years later, or more closer to our current date, modern age, and then the rejections due to historical bias were a little bit lower. So it's just kind of a simplified example of model staleness. Next up, we have the data drift and concept drift. So the data drift would happen when there is a change in statistical characteristics of the input data, and then the input data has changed, which renders the training which renders the trained model irrelevant currently. And the next example here is when we have objective that has changed, and that results in something called concept drift. Concept drift is illustrated through this example very kind of like nicely, where you can see you have the same data in the middle. It's some sort of statements from people, and if you are putting a label to it, label would be actually quite different in the 1960s versus if you put it in the context of 2019 or something closer to current age. So we have the exact same data, but we have completely different objectives. So a lot of things have happened actually in the world. There are a lot of standards that are international standards that are talking about AI risks and how to mitigate them, how to address these risks. The EU AI Act has its own risk management system that I'll have summarized on next slide, but there are a lot of resources out there. NIST has a very well worked through AI risk management system. You have international standards organization coming up with their own guidances, and the US Federal Reserve has their own as well. So this is, I'm not going to go through this slide, it's overwhelming, but this is the EU AI Act's risk management system on how to implement it. And it has all of the standard, it's a standard process that goes from risk analysis, risk evaluation, risk mitigation, residual risk acceptability evaluation, risk management reporting, and then finally usage instructions, documentation, and how to register things in the upcoming EU's database. I wanted to mention another thing that is not obvious risk, but it's very important in the context of responsible AI. When we're talking about responsible AI practices, this is the responsible AI trade-offs. So I've shown you that slide of different practices, sustainability, safety, security. You have the other evaluation metrics such as accuracy. And sometimes, depending on what your priority is in the organization or use case to use case, you will prioritize different metrics. And unfortunately, they don't always work hand in hand. So if you prioritize accuracy, it may be at the expense of sustainability, or if you prioritize explainability and transparency, it may come at the expense of privacy. So it's something to think about and explore, and it's very use case to use case specific. So a lot of these things require really, really huge organizational shifts. And they're done through something called cultural competencies for AI risk management, through having organizational accountability and implementing different organizational processes that would answer who is in question, what is being done, when, and how do we respond to these changes? And of course, implementing a culture of effective change by employing diverse and experienced teams that would be able to think through the potential use cases and implement the best responsible AI systems, and that would be able to challenge and evaluate the AI system at every step of its life cycle instead of skipping or finding shortcuts. And this brings me to the final task on AI governance framework and guidelines. It's another task that typically responsible AI teams and compliance teams are responsible for, is finding this sort of common point between the regulatory compliance, best practices, and then your own internal organizational compliance. And this should happen at every stage, as I mentioned before. From ideation, from the moment that there's an idea to either develop or purchase an AI system from a vendor, through maturation phases, how you develop it, what does the procurement do, how is the relationship with vendors, and what kind of contracts do we have in place? Do our contracts with vendors take into consideration these kinds of challenges? How do we deploy these? Are technologies ready? Do we meet certain criteria depending on our own risk appetite? How do we operate and monitor these systems? And finally, what do our end users know, and are they trained enough to follow these processes? So what are some of the lessons learned by talking to a lot of people who want to implement AI? They typically want AI to do something faster, to do something more consistently, or to do something at scale. But then it's really important to remember that also incidents can occur faster, more consistently, and at scale. And this is where the AI governance come in place, because every drastic increase in materiality of AI systems should be also followed by drastic increase of AI governance and safety measures for AI. And there are many different ways to attack this issue, and it's all use case specific and depending on your prioritization. And I'll end it on this last slide that I'm not going to go through word by word, but it is just to know what a timeline is coming from the EU, but also that the EU AI office is working on explaining certain things a little bit closer and to facilitate the compliance process for companies in EU. So thank you very much.